With the YouTube video that you just watched, you've now been introduced to the issue of fertilizer. And so we're going to continue with our history, a brief history of agriculture by kind of taking a step back and looking at fertilizer again. And then we'll move forward and bring us up to the present time. So, and this really was addressed in the YouTube video, but I just want to make it clear. Here we have another problem for farmers. In this case, the problem is that plants need nitrogen. And in the video, you saw that nitrogen is pretty quickly used up by crops, but it's not very quickly replaced. And so getting enough nitrogen into the soil in order to grow the number of crops that we want to grow is an issue. And additionally, nitrogen is naturally low in the soil. It is high in the atmosphere. In fact, nitrogen gas is the most abundant gas in the atmosphere. So we know there's a lot of nitrogen there. It's just not in a form that is readily usable by plants. And so the natural solution, the solution in nature, is nitrogen fixing plants. So there are certain plants, and I think this is addressed in the YouTube video as well, certain plants that have symbioses with nitrogen fixing bacteria who can take nitrogen gas and fix it into a form of nitrogen that the plants can then use. So this is a mutualistic relationship. Those plants include legumes like peas and peanuts and other legumes, alders, locust trees, clover, alfalfa, and soy. So sometimes farmers will plant these nitrogen-fixing plants in order to help get more nitrogen in the soil, but it doesn't, as we saw in the video, still isn't enough nitrogen. And so in the early 20th century, synthetic fertilizer was invented, and that's what was covered in the video that you watched. So it was invented in 1918 and was being mass-produced by the 1930s. And in this image on the right, we see that commercial fertilizer, we see huge increases, or a huge increase starting in the 1930s after it was starting to be mass produced. And so fertilizer use at this point has now increased is 5 times greater than it was in 1940. So we rely heavily on synthetic fertilizers. And it's not just that, we could choose to use it or choose not to. If we didn't use fertilizers, the production of our food would be cut at least by 1/3, but most likely by a half if we didn't use synthetic fertilizers. Okay, another thing that I want to draw attention to, though, is how fertilizers are produced. So we're talking about synthetic fertilizers, which are produced by humans and are the most abundantly used fertilizers. So nitrogen, the source of nitrogen is air. And there's another video actually that I posted, it's optional, that kind of walks you through this in a video manner if you want to see more details. So we get air, but nitrogen gas from air has to be combined with hydrogen in order to develop urea or ammonium nitrate, so other fertilizers. So natural gas, a fossil fuel, is the source of hydrogen for that. And so the production of synthetic fertilizers also relies on fossil fuels. And so this is another reliance on fossil fuels. We've already talked all about the issues with fossil fuels. So agriculture, modern agriculture in this way, and in others as we'll see later, but in this way relies heavily upon fossil fuels. Okay, so let's summarize what we've learned here. The industrialization of agriculture allowed increased food yield, so we can now produce more food than we ever could before. Easier farming, so it's less labor. And also, food is much less expensive than it used to be. So these all seem like kind of win-wins. Farming is easier, we're doing more at lower cost. We're also using less land, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit with the future slides as well. We're using, we have not dramatically increased the amount of land that are devoted to agriculture in the United States. The number of farms has dramatically decreased over time, largely because of industrialized farming. We have fewer farms, but those farms are larger. So see, the average size of the farm has increased. Okay, so the industrialization of agriculture brought us up to kind of the middle of the 20th century. But at that point, now we have this dramatically growing human population on Earth. So picture that exponential growth curve and how high we must have gotten by 1960, so the middle of the 20th century. So now we have a new problem. We have way more people, and so we need more food. In the video that you watched, the YouTube video, they kind of briefly mentioned that we can't just keep taking over more and more land to grow more and more food. There isn't enough land for that. And so we have had to come up with a way to grow more food using the same amount of land. So the solution to this was improvements in all aspects, really, of growing food. So we have improvements in irrigation, developments in irrigation systems that make them more efficient. So those big irrigation systems that you've seen out in fields, those were developed around this time. So now we have irrigation that can move around a field. It can put more water out there. A lot of them are tapped right into the groundwater, and so they're pulling it right out of the ground. So irrigation improved at this time. Increased industrial farming, so continuing to develop those big industrial farms that are more efficient at growing food. Developing seeds, so hybrid seeds, developing GM as genetically modified seeds, and we'll talk about genetically modified foods in a later lecture, but GM foods allowed increased production of food. Improvements in fertilizers and improvements in how we distribute those fertilizers across a field. Improvements in pesticides in order to attack pests of foods, of those crops, and improvements in machinery. So all of these things, just continuous innovations in how we grow food from 1960 to the year 2000, allowed us to dramatically increase our yield, our crop yield, and the production of food. So that's what we see here from 1961 to 2004, 5, 6, 7. We see a nice increase in the production of food, all while the area devoted to farming stayed basically the same. So this is called the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution, at first when you see green, you might think kind of environmentally friendly, and this absolutely is not environmentally friendly, as we'll see. It's the Green Revolution, green meaning crops, the revolution in how we grow our industrially produced crops. And so as we see in this figure, and I just described this figure on the previous slide, the results of the Green Revolution concentrated efforts to make farming, to make agriculture more efficient, were extremely successful. This was a global revolution. We successfully were able to increase the production of food without increasing the area that was used for agriculture. And so we have this big success. So that really brings us up to today. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk about problems with this. So obviously this is successful. The issue with growing food, we've really tackled it up to this point. We're doing really well. So we need to remember that those are really big benefits, and they were necessary benefits. So now though, we're seeing some detriments to these big innovations. And now we need to deal with those detriments in order to make agriculture and food production more sustainable so we can continue it into the future.